And by nature, a monoculture also has to have poverty in order for it to exist. So anyone that is celebrating at the altar of the dollar as the prime purveyor of success is also saying, inadvertently, quite possibly, that they celebrate poverty as part of that price.
This is Straight Talk in the COVID economy, and my name is Larry Quick. Our world has changed and there's no going back. The COVID economy is now very real. We are adapting to telework, Zooming, online learning and new industries like PanSafe and other opportunities revealed by COVID-19. The challenges are also with us: bankruptcies, unemployment, debt and confusion. In Straight Talk in the COVID economy, we meet thinkers and innovators who bring insight and information into the opportunities and risks of our rapidly emerging COVID economy. Straight Talk in the COVID economy is brought to you by Resilient Futures. This is alongside our partner, Impact Africa Network. Impact Africa Network is an innovation incubator based in Nairobi, Kenya. It seeks to be a catalyst for the next Silicon Valley in Africa. Impact Africa Network needs all the support we can provide. So please donate at www.impactafrica.network. Hi and welcome everyone. I'd like to introduce Christine McDougall, who's got a very, very interesting title, Chief Steward, Syntropic Enterprise. So not only is Christine a Chief Steward, she also has a very weird name. Not that weird for us that know, but know Christine too, but Syntropic. And now Christine's going to explain that all to us. But welcome, Christine.
Well, lovely to be here. Thank you, Larry.
Thanks very much for spending some time with us. From sunny Queensland too, but you're stuck inside right now, so like all of us. So, Christine, I just loved what you had on your LinkedIn page. Normally what I do is design to Christine, I just go around and look for different pieces, but I think this says it all about what Christine's up to. And it says, it all began with this. In 2019, I was fed up. I just love that when I read it. Fed up with the morally bankrupt leaders and broken systems. Get to your point, Christine. Me too. So I started a movement that would strive to leave everything touched better. Now that's really simple language, but strive to leave everything touched better. Mm-hmm. This idea, this evolution, this belief became Syntropic Enterprise. It's a new take on business, a business plan that celebrates those thinking with tomorrow in mind. Syntropic Enterprise is creating a world with a future, a world where integrity, values, and human connection are driven through considered, positive productivity for the earth. It's this mindset that leads to success and leaves a lasting legacy. A world with a future of the universe considered and not smirked at. And how many times does that happen? And I'm just going to tell you that I met Christine through other people, Cindy Ford and Audrey Lobo, and other people that I've interviewed. And what I love about Christine's work is that it takes science, if you like, in a different way and makes it real. And even though there might be a little bit of some hurdles in language to overcome, which everyone with new ideas has, it's real. And Kristen, I don't know what else to say, but yeah. My first question would be that in your work, you talk about entropic versus syntropic. Mm-hmm. Can we start with understanding the difference between the two?
Yeah, well, entropy is the second law of thermodynamics, which is the universe is wearing down a little bit like rust. And so energetically becoming less evolved and wearing down. And syntropy is the opposite of that. And the word was coined largely through Bucky Fuller, who was also the guy that brought synergy and as a word. And syntropy means literally towards a higher order for an eternally regenerative universe. And what Bucky did was he proposed that as science at the moment is only seeing entropy, he believed that syntropy was as powerful if not more powerful than entropy. In other words, the world is regenerating versus degenerating. And so a syntropic enterprise is any human engagement, whether it's legal, friends in a basement, a not-for-profit, any human engagement that leaves everything it touches better.
Wow. And how does that actually work if we would say that, take that principle?
Yeah.
That we're mainly, if you look at Australia, we're an extractive economy. Mm-hmm. And I use the word economy relatively loosely, mm-hmm. in the way that people have used it too long here in conventional economics. But an economy, and I'm not talking about households and what economics was meant to do, but I'm talking about economy at the country level. That we're extractive. We take stuff out and we send it away. We don't make too much these days, and we're mostly service-based. So how would that work if we were changing things around? You know, if we were to put new sort of economic models in place? Yeah.
Well, all the work of Syntropic Enterprise is rather than trying to rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic, or argue with the current model, it's to build new models that make the existing obsolete. And a child will tell you that in a finite universe, extracting to extinction, there is an end result of that. Yeah. And someone will be there for the end result, perhaps. If it's not us, it will be our children or our children's children. And so there will be a time when the way we do business and engage in enterprise and profit, in parenthesis, has to end, because it's impossible. And so my thinking is, rather than spending my time trying to change the current models, how do we create new ones that make the existing obsolete? And so this is what Syntropy does, and Syntropic Enterprise is really looking at the laws inherent in nature. So the laws that have been tested and tried for billions and billions of years. And how do we apply that to enterprise design and human coordination, including things like our governance system, our legal structures, our financial currency flows, how we provision, how we value and honor the entire system, including people's contribution. And so this is not this is how you do it. This is where there are some models that have had case studies and are demonstrably able to say, if you do it this way, this is what you get. And it is far better for everyone involved and the future, the 100-year plan future at minimum. But this is also the opportunity for people to go, where do we want to spend our time and energy? Do we want to spend our time and energy trying to fight over the best deck chairs on the Titanic, or would we actually really like to apply the synergistic capacity of human mind, which is the greatest capacity that we have, yeah, towards a world that works for Earth and all her creatures? Yeah. And my position is that if that's not where we're spending our time, looking at how we can do that increases the well-being of every human and Earth, then we're very much caught up in the old cycle. That's not to say this is a piece of cake and it's easy.
Yeah. No, because that's the point. And if I tell a bit of a Resilient Future story, my sort of like getting pissed off of the system happened in the 80s, and it was in the crash of the 80s, and I dug out every, and I was working in strategy at the time, and I dug out every management book I had and threw them all away because it was a waste of time. So I just wrong, and went on a search for a few years, and cut a long story short, I found resilience thinking, complex adaptive systems, whole systems, a very little touch of something I've been studying for some time called whole sight.
Yeah.
as an add-on to insight, if you like, and foresight is actually got a bit of a part to play in that, not the way it's necessarily taught today, but and particularly looking at whole systems. And we did a lot of work in organisations, but also a lot of work, particularly in America, in what we call civic resilience, by looking at places as whole systems. And that was mainly done in Providence, Rhode Island, and there's still a legacy of that thinking there. But the thing that we wrote a book back in 2013, I think it was called Resilience Unleashed, which was all about providing our thinking in a book about resilient systems. And the publisher said, "This is a fantastic book. You're going to sell this for $1,000 a copy. You'll sell 5 copies, and I'll go into the logs of people that buy that sort of thing and pay that sort of money, and you'll never be read and never be heard." So we had to spend time on writing our current book, which is Disrupted, and that was distributed in 2015, and it's very sort of popular with organisations and people today, given the circumstances. But the thing that we found difficult was taking what we had and putting into something that people would actually use. And that's the difficult thing. I was talking to a chap yesterday about a universal basic income. And we've talked to other people in recent times about starting with values. And then I spoke to the previous, or just recently left 6 months ago, before COVID, head of public health in New Zealand. And his final comment, which has happened a lot, it starts with reevaluating your values, which I 100% believe in. What are your values is one of the questions we ask people. But, because we've got to leverage disruption to generate sustainable value in some shape or form. Making the best of where we are, but make it better in the future. And that point that we've raised here is, how do we get these things to change and relatively fast?
Yeah, and so from my point of view, it's and my work has been inspired for 34 years by the work of Buckminster Fuller. And so one of the things that he committed to do was make models, demonstrated the possibility. And then he would say, argue with the model. So what we're doing at Syntropic Enterprise, and the term is in the Creative Commons, by the way, so that I don't own it, nobody can own it. We want Syntropic Enterprise to be business as usual, which that's our ambition. But at the moment, what we need to do is we need as many models of a syntropic enterprise functioning at all levels of society, and then do the case studies and say, argue with the model, don't argue with us. Now, let me be very clear. If your intention in business, if you're entrenched in a business that wants to serve the shareholder at all costs above anything else, and that is the model that you're operating from, then Syntropic Enterprise is not for you.
Yes.
And so we have to apply a new level of thinking to how we do enterprise design. Currency, what is value? A really deep question, what is value? Why are we looking at, and this is, the simple thing, GDP growth, the study this week that came out in the UK from YouGov, where 8 out of 10 people currently want well-being and health to be more relevant to the British government than GDP growth. And that post-COVID, they're hoping for it still to remain more relevant than GDP growth. So in this exact moment right now, where people are going, why isn't our health and well-being considered with as much emphasis as GDP growth as the metric of success of a society? And so how do you, if you put the question around the future of our home planet and all people and creatures on the home planet as something that you cared about, if that was the key purpose behind why you got out of bed in the morning and did things, that it benefited not only you, but it benefited your grandchildren, and you became a good ancestor, then what type of enterprise and what type of products and services would you create? And how would you do that? And it requires a complete unstitching, unpacking, challenging of pretty much everything that we're taught at business school, including how we do accounting. And so one of the things that Bucky Fuller did was he did what he called all-in accounting, which means that on his balance sheet, he looked at the cost of earth to create a barrel of oil. He looked at the human side of that, the finding, extraction, refining, transport, use, and then he looked at the post-use. And if we consider that cycle, then a barrel of oil in 1927 was not affordable by any human on the planet, and eventually we would be paying the after-tax of our ill-considered measure of value. And I think people are starting to confront that reality right now.
Yeah, that's so true. I know that when we work with organisations, we talk about the value equation, and you have to look at a range of different values. And you know, in terms of getting people to come on the journey, you have to put the intangibles in there, such as brand and product and all those sort of things in terms of valuing them. But you know, the first thing to value is the planet. And people, the planet, people, and getting people to understand that profit is a lag indicator of all those other values working. It's a lag indicator, and as a lag indicator, you have to take a whole systems approach to the costs. And it was going, you know, that conversation was going very well before the GFC, because we were starting to see eco assets be valued, and there'd been an eco asset register set up. I think one of the big Wall Street firms, or a few of the big Wall Street firms, were starting to do that and putting ways of actually easily being able to measure the cost of the full cost of a product, and getting absolute good measures to go into accounting. Unfortunately, that was all lost in the GFC. Everyone raced back to conventional economics. And, you know, even around the year 2000, I was starting to look at intangibles and measuring intangibles, because most of the value of a lot of organisations are digital values or digital organisations, and they don't have tangible assets apart from intellectual property. So intangibles, you know, you only have to look at, say, Virgin. Its value is in its brand. Well, how do you put that on a balance sheet? So in amongst all of the intangibles and amongst all of the, you know, whole systems value, there's like looking for measures. How do you measure the value of a tree, particularly when you're selling property? So when in our work at that time took us to look at New Orleans and the cost of Katrina, when they took away, whatever they call, and they broke the levees, bang, and that caused Katrina. Now, when you look at the cost of Katrina, on longitudinally particularly, you see that widening or deepening that river cost trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. Yeah. And I remember another example is that one of the chief scientists from CSIRO years ago, during the Howard era, made the statement that I don't think that Australia's really ever made any money out of exporting wheat. And it was like, what? Are you crazy? And he looked at the whole systems approach and he said the amount of topsoil, particularly out of Western Australia, that was exported with the wheat when it went overseas it can't be replaced. And the topsoils in Western Australia, you know, these might not be right, but they're that thick. In a place like in England and all that, or where they do, particularly in America, in the Midwest, they do broadacre farming. the topsoils are like, meters thick. So they can lose a bit of topsoil, but over time we've depreciated our topsoil, particularly out of Western Australia, and the salts come up. What's the cost of replenishing the salt?
Yeah. Yeah, and the profit should be a side effect of our work. It should be the side effect, not the main effect. That's a principle called Precession, which again, is the work of Buckminster Fuller. And you mentioned a tree. How do you put a value on a tree? Well, you can only do that in context. But also, and you mentioned the intangibles, and I'm going to throw in there the intangibles that all of us know in the end are the most precious values, such as love, care, family, community.
Yeah.
Which show me an enterprise that puts those on the balance sheet as actually, and yet right now in our current environment, the essential services in parenthesis, the ones, and particularly Australia is obviously lesser affected, but the ones that are the essential services in countries that have been ravaged by COVID, the values of care and love and nurturing and so on are clearly seen as the most precious values that we have to offer right now.
Yeah.
A CEO who can make a decision about a digital trade in 30 seconds cannot save his grandmother from dying of COVID. And so where's the value on that balance sheet? And so these are the type of issues that are in our face alive. And at the same time, currently people from whatever level of education or global experience are recognizing that what a government said they couldn't afford suddenly became affordable. Well, how did that happen?
Yeah.
So let's ask some deeper and more meaningful questions about what is a society, what is being a citizen, how are we in community, how do we be stewards, and that's the reason I use the word chief steward. How do we be stewards of the things that matter to us most, and including become good ancestors, hopefully for our grandchildren's grandchildren. These are type of questions that I don't think we should be, in my bio it says smirked at. I think these are real questions. And unfortunately, our short-term cycle that we live in, including the political cycle, squeezes out the potential for these type of conversations.
I think that's a great question. I'm just thinking how unsustainable that is. If you think about at every scale, from the local, if I look down the high street here, right out to the globe, competency is more exploited than the cost of let me get it straight. The cost of the exploitation of the competency for what productivity you get. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's the basic principle of economics through a system is the flow of transactions through a system and how they create value on the way, but they has to be win-win. If you create value for yourself and for no one else, that was okay when I say it's not okay, but that tended to work. It's like when England exploited its colonies, it did that by the whip. And then all of a sudden now, England going back to those colonies and saying, I've got a product that's good for you. They haven't necessarily picked up on that. It's like people got a long memory about what damage England did to, say, India.
Yeah.
Or the damage that America has done to a lot of places that made them very angry. That doesn't produce stable economic systems, social economic systems.
Yeah, and I think
if no one's got any money to spend,
yeah,
there's no flow of strong
Well,
connections.
well, it's the Walmart model, which is ultimately the Ouroboros eating its own tail, which is the Walmart absolutely lives that, which is eventually people that are employed by Walmart can't afford to go shopping in Walmart. And there's a long sequence of events that gets to that. So I revert, this is nothing that is rocket science. A child could give you some simple stuff around this.
Yeah.
It is actually common sense, and the secret is that I've had conversations like this with people in the ivory towers of the banks in Australia who have completely agreed, and yet they're stuck in this system that says this is the way. And it's not just stuck in that system; they're stuck in the monolith of the system, but they also have an identity and a lifestyle and so on to maintain. And the wonderful thing about the experience that we're going through right now is we're recognizing that in the matter of weeks, everything is possible to change.
Yeah.
And in actual fact, having a lifestyle and having family and having time to breathe and contemplate rather than being squeezed from wall-to-wall busyness is actually something that people are finding incredibly attractive.
Yeah.
And I'm putting this in parenthesis for anyone listening to this who is not from Australia or New Zealand, where we have an incredibly privileged experience right now that a lot of the rest of the world are not experiencing. And so I really want to put it in that context, that we are so lucky to be here.
Yeah, and it's like that gets back to comments that we've had from people where university said that, and we know it because we worked with them for some time, the resistance they had to say online learning and work from home was immense. Then they have to do it, and now a lot of them don't want to go back. Yeah. They keep on doing it that way because they're enjoying the experience. And I think, we've got one client who sort of read the signals early on and already had organised for all his people to work from home. And as soon as COVID appeared, bang, they all went to work from home. It's a service-based industry organisation. That they will never go back. And the cost saving in that is immense for them, but their people enjoy it. And it's part of their talent attraction sort of program. Yeah. So there's all of these things changing that really strike to our humanity. And I shouted something yesterday, was like, how do we make humanity happen? Making humanity happen when we're all human beings. Mm-hmm. And we all join our little clubs and become an ick and an oik and an Australian and a Chinaman and all that sort of stuff. At the end of the day, you cut the DNA and we're relatively all the same.
And I would raise you one on that and say, how do we support the thriving and the ongoing thriving and flourishing and syntropy of nature, because we are nature.
Yes. Well, there's an interesting one. One of the things that always drove me crazy when I got involved with the environmental movement, and I was always primarily an observer. I never ever really fancied tying myself to a tree, but a lot of my friends did, sort of the way bulldozers and all that stuff. And I was thinking at the time, there's got to be a better way than this. If we have to do this with every tree that counts, we're going to have to bloody get a lot of change.
Yeah.
So what's the more strategic way of doing it? And that's always been on my mind for years and years, back to the 80s when I first got involved. It was, to me, a no-brainer. One of the first things I heard was people said, there are human systems and there are natural systems.
Yeah.
That's the problem. You think that humans are separated from nature in some way.
Yeah.
We are a species of this planet, the same as a dog or a horse or a flower or water. Yeah. We're all made up of the same stuff. We're just different form.
Yeah.
And we are a natural part of this system.
Yeah.
And as a natural part of the system, we are fortunate to exist in the way we do on this planet.
Yeah.
And we've only got one.
Yeah.
And don't think that hugging a tree makes a difference. You know, sure, if it's a sentient being that I'm not aware of, then, wow, hug as many trees as we can. But, you know, hug a tree because you love hugging trees because you love trees. But, you know, the planet has got a history of not giving a shit about human beings.
Yeah.
You know, and that might be an offence to some people. But, you know, I always remember reading a book that said, I'll show you how long people have lived on this planet or existed as human beings. He said, you take the World Trade Center when it existed, and you take the very top of the World Trade Center, and you'll find a coating of paint on there. Mm-hmm. Well, we're like, you know, if time is down here, we are the meniscus.
Yeah.
The surface of the meniscus on top of that paint, on top of the World Trade Center. So, you know, I then said, you know, there's no history that this planet produced us for a purpose, apart from the fact, if you believe in Darwin, we just happened. Yeah. Like a lot of them did. So we should be, and we're smart, hopefully, we should be worried about it and stop doing this bullshit of human systems and natural systems.
Yeah.
You know, even the resilience people who work on resilient systems at the complex adaptive systems level treat human beings as a separate function to the natural systems of the world. Mm. And, you know, that is a mistake from day one. You've got to work inside the system rather than working outside the system.
Well, we are part of the system, and there is, you know, what you're really implying is the hubris that man has dominion over earth. I think that's one of the biblical statements, when in actual fact we're incredibly interdependent.
Yes.
And we're learning more about our interdependencies, again, through this current situation, when there is a scarcity of all things in the world, toilet paper, and then a scarcity of flour, and these things in Australia, a scarcity of vegetable seedlings and so on to grow gardens. That we are intricately interdependent, and what we do, you know, that great meme that happened as a result of chaos theory, the butterfly flapping its wings in the Amazon causes a rainstorm in Thailand or something like that. There's a truth to that, and you only have to look at some of the trim tabs, the people and circumstance in the world that have set entail a massive change, such as Rosa Parks, Greta Thunberg, you know, people that looked completely inadequate, innocuous, disarming, who have set a trail. And so imagine a world with 1 million Gretas or a million Rosa Parks or 1 million Bucky Fullers. And, you know, that's the invitation that I put out to people. Well, you are that person if you want to be. And if we really do want to create a world with a future, it's not going to come from government. It's not going to come from the echelons of corporate leadership. It's not. That is not where leadership is going to come from. It's going to come from people on the ground who say, we can do better. We're going to do better. And we're just going to do it quietly and get on with it. And we're not going to fight, you know, against the incumbency. We're just going to get on quietly and do it. And it's the guy in Los Angeles in 2010 who decided that the strip in front of his house that was just concrete, he'll dig it up and he'll plant a vegetable garden. Why not? Well, now people all around the world are looking at how do we plant vegetable gardens in nature strips and so on and so forth. That is a seemingly innocuous trim tab of a change that has unbelievable effects. And we all have the potentiality for that. And that's part of what we're inviting with Syntropic Enterprises. You have to think about the world, you know, as this living dynamic system of which we are integrally engaged. not only are we integrally engaged, but we have a value as individuals and as a collective to bring towards that. And so how do we animate that? But doing it in a way that pretty much challenges every single model that we've been taught about how to do business and enterprise, and instead apply those laws inherent in nature that have had billions of years of experimentation to show that they work. You know, and that's pretty much my work right now.
Wow. And
yeah,
we're in what we call the COVID-19 economy. Just a bit of background on that. We've been through what we see as these sort of we've got four horizons ahead of us. And one, like ground zero was the end of 2019, or that paradigm, or that idea of 2019, what worked, what didn't work. There are all sorts of issues and problems that, you know, people have got to learn what exponential change means, because you've been on TV, and thank heaven for that. We know what exponential change means now as a hopefully as a community. But there are so many systems in breakdown where thresholds have been breached, fish stocks, a whole bunch of different food, soil and earth, water. That people talk about water wars as if it's like, oh yeah, it's like a football score. You know, you understand what those base elements mean, and they're in total breakdown. They've breached thresholds. They're changing exponentially, and there's no going back. So this is the reality in 2019. Then whether people took responsibility for it is a different question. Our economy was really in a shambles, and lipstick painted on the pig by government. You know, inequity, and you go on and on. And you wonder why people are pissed off in other countries and decide to go and attack people. But then we get this shock. So our first horizon is this disorientation and shock that's happened. And, you know, oh my God, I don't believe this. And, you know, that continues on for a while as the shocks reverberate and go through. But what's emerging pretty rapidly is a COVID economy. That is people working in and doing the best they can at this time. And then understanding that this is a very sharp decline in performance of the old paradigm. And we're down here in this new paradigm, still going down. And that's based on COVID-19 lockdowns and the subsequent social and economic shocks, and the new economy that comes out of that. You know, government paying more money all of a sudden when it couldn't pay money to New Start in Australia. Doubled it straight away, bang, you know. That money is going to be spent, and you've got to have money flowing through the system, otherwise everything dies. We've got to get new capability built to make the new system work. So people are doing coffees at the front door of their shop and all that stuff. But, you know, that's not a viable model, because you've got to pay for all the room at the back that you're not using. So there's all that stuff in this economy got to work itself out. But there's still people who want to go back to the past. But what we're seeing is, over the next, and because I think this economy is going to be around for at least 2 years, if not more, we've got to create this other that comes in that period of time. There's this golden period of time for reinvention and investing in reinvention, rather than spending an awful lot of money and time and people's visions and lives and their wishes and getting back to the past. So there's a lot of people, I mean, we've done really well in telework, and that's had a lot of benefits. We've done, you know, we've got a future of work thing that's happening anyway, back in 2019 with automation and all that sort of stuff. Let that loose, let it happen. Let's deal with the people in this COVID economy, rather than bullshitting people that, you know, we're going to be able to retrain you in the old economy and everything's going to be fine. So, you know, I don't have all the answers, but by thinking our way through a COVID economy context or conditions and patterns that are occurring, and what is it that we will want to get to as an interim to total transformation that deals with, say, climate change. You know, how do we use this period of time to get ourselves into a position that honours the past? And, you know, like, let's not dwell and blame people and all that, but how do we use this time to really get ourselves moving in a different direction. And I love your idea of models. You know, I love the idea of building, it's almost, they're not quite physical necessarily, but physical presence of doing it better type organizations.
Yeah, and for me, enterprise is a human endeavor. So it doesn't matter whether it's you and I with no formal structure, a community group, a not-for-profit, a large corporate, a small business, it's an enterprise. So the only way that we're going to do anything good or bad in the world is through humans coming together. And the greatest exponential technology that we have in universe is the technology of synergy. And synergy means that we've got to start with the whole first. But it also means that when you take a poisonous gas and an explosive metal, that no amount of examining either of those parts would determine that when you combine those two things together, we get a white powder that we sprinkle on food. And so synergy by nature, if you and I are working together towards something that we care deeply about, a purpose that we cared about, if we're behaving synergistically, then the outcome of our coming together to work has to be far greater than 1 + 1 = 2. It has to be 100, 1,000, if we're going to use numbers, exponentially greater. And so the human mind, in distinction to the human brain, the human mind working synergistically towards a future that honors all Earth and all her creatures and humanity's well-being. There's nothing that we can't solve in reference to our current world. That's number one. Number two, this is a rethink time. It's like a massive pattern interrupt and a time to connect back to what really matters. I'm a huge fan of going back to etymology of words. The real meaning of economy is care of our home.
Yeah.
Let's have home be our home planet, number one, our home nation or continent, if we want to go to that, our home the ocean, our home the sky, our home community, our home that houses us, and then our home called the physical human body, which is the home of us, as individuals.
Yep.
So if we are really, really wanting to build an economy that has resilience and a future, reverting to your words, then we need to figure out how to take care of all of those elements of home in the way that we conduct and do economy. And one of the ways that we do that in Syntropic is that we use an all-in accounting model that has at minimum 6 domains of value on the register. It's not a measure, because measurement is part of the incumbent model that is always going to be reductionist. And I've yet to find anyone that isn't repelled by the thought of trying to put a dollar price on the experience of being present to the birth of a child.
Yes.
There's a debasement that happens at a human sort of value level. There might be a few sociopaths and psychopaths that would be happy to entertain that, but regular humans, they find that, abhorrent. And so when we honor value in multiple domains and have money only ever have at least 1/6, maybe less, space at the table of our whole systems enterprise, then what we're doing immediately is we're starting now to recognize the other values as of equal capacity, because having an entire system built around the measure of money and accumulation is a monoculture. In any natural system, monocultures are their own demise. Yep. And by nature, a monoculture also has to have poverty in order for it to exist. So anyone that is celebrating at the altar of the dollar as the prime purveyor of success is also saying, inadvertently, quite possibly, that they celebrate poverty as part of that price. And so, how do we do that? That's part of what we're doing with Syntropic Enterprise, is we're actually creating and have created and are deploying and have deployed models that are inherent in nature to enterprise design and human coordination. We don't have all the maps. We don't pretend to have all the answers, but we do know that when we start with the right questions, we're going to get a lot further than if we fail to consider the future that we want to see.
Wow. And that, so tell us how that manifests from a training or a creation of an example.
Yeah. So, the really simple example is how do you create an enterprise? Well, first of all, that has a purpose that people care about. Not only do they care about, but they actively want to see that happen. And then how do you create the enterprise architecture? And I don't mean like a rigid structure. I mean like a cell membrane, a breathable architecture that enables people to engage in that purpose in a way that honors the fullness of their humanity and their skill sets, and enables them to become almost entirely self-managed, but also is developmental deliberately by design. And one of the things that we do in this, and this has been done successfully, by the way, one of the things that we do in this is that we create a tool that looks at value in multiple domains, both at the input and the output. So what do I have the capacity, willingness, and desire to bring to this enterprise or this purpose? In multiple domains, number one. And number two, and for that bringing, what do I expect in return? In those same domains of value. And the very asking of those two questions is entirely developmental for so many people, because so many of us can't articulate our value, number one, and we can't ask for what we think our value is worth. And when I say worth, I don't always mean money. I'm talking about the sense of being fully seen for our contribution, which is a huge value. The sense of being part of a community that is doing something that you really care about, that's a massive value. The sense of learning, for some people like myself, being engaged in something that is expansive and challenging and learning and the unknown and the emergent, is extraordinarily exciting. So how do we actually create environments where those things happen while we build products and services that have an all-in accounting, all-in consideration, both of the costs from multiple levels, and have a thoughtful consideration of, at minimum, the 100-year plan. These are big questions. I don't know what's going to happen next week. So the 100-year plan is, very tricky. But if we're not asking those questions, then surely we're going to design a system that says it's okay to dump the chemicals in the river because the people downstream aren't in our community.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a process, but at the very core of it is those fundamental pieces that the human mind working together about things we care about has this capacity, number one, and that we can create a world with a future. And the only way we're going to do it is with humans coming together, which is some form of enterprise. I'm not calling it business. I'm not calling it can include business, but it's actually human endeavor.
Yes. And that, yeah. So you're doing masterclasses.
Yeah.
In this.
Yeah, not just masterclasses, because I've been working with this material for over 30 years, and I've been applying many of this in both traditional and non-traditional enterprises. But I'm really mindful that I don't have all the, we say new models, new maps, new mindsets. I don't have all the pieces of the puzzle. So yeah. We're also creating a community of practice for people who may be able to contribute to those extra puzzle pieces. But really what we're trying to do is get as many Syntropic enterprises in action in the world, to do case studies, to write the in parenthesis, the white paper, when people like us do things like this is what happens. But this is not what just happens, this is what happens at community level. This is what happens to our families. This is what happens to our health and our well-being and our affordability and our vitality and, et cetera, et cetera. So, it's not just a traditional, in parenthesis, measure. It's actually really looking at the things that matter to humanity as an outcome of living and being like this. And so yeah, it's a community of practice. It's there's education, there's support. And at this time, there are companies around the world who are genuinely have been sitting in this conversation going, we have to do things differently. We have no idea how. We have no idea where to start. Oh, and by the way, now we have some time, because there are some companies that are sitting there with time on their hands right now, the fashion industry, for example, or the retail, industry and so on. And so, and there are models of, companies that have made this type of commitment, and we want to gather more and more of those stories and start telling the stories and saying, actually, it's possible.
Wow.
It's a big mission, Larry, just a little mission there.
I think what I'll do is, what time is it? Oh, it's past 12. I think what I'll do 1 o'clock is change the world. It sounds like, wow, because you've sold me.
Well, it's not a sales pitch.
It's not.
Yeah, it's an invitation, it's an invitation.
It's sort of like, if I'm to take, my personal story was, so I want to say thank you so much, and we shall talk again.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you for asking me on, and anyone that is both open to and applying and or working in this type of space, has my 100% support and backing, because it's going to take a village, a community, a crowd.
Yeah. All over the place.
Yeah, all over the place.
Yes. We'll be like Rosa Parks doing our stuff.
Yeah.
Well, we're on board.
Thank you. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Larry. Appreciate it very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
We hope you've enjoyed this Straight Talking the COVID Economy podcast. Thank you for listening. And please subscribe on your preferred podcast platform. For more information about Resilient Futures, please visit www.resilientfutures.com, and please support our partner, Impact Africa Network, at www.impactafrica.network. We need all the support we can to help them build their own incubator. We know that there are many other great podcasts out there, and your time is precious, and you chose to listen to Straight Talk on the COVID Economy. And we appreciate that. Thank you.